Chapter 5, Staffing for Service. Employees of the hospitality industry, easier said than done, because I think that we are, generically speaking, we know what needs to be done, but finding the right people to do that is a little bit more difficult than it sounds. The emotional labor part of what we do definitely factors into how the guests want to feel, how we make the guest feel. And, it's a constant battle. It is, you, as some people say, which is kind of cheesy, being on when you're not on. And we have to find the right people to do that. Not just, I think the book uses an example of everything that goes into a guest checking into their hotel room and finally getting into their hotel room and saying, how was your service at the front desk? Well, all the other things that went into that experience for them is beyond just that surface. So the manager's role would be, of course, to find the right people, right place, right time, all those cheesy sayings, but they're important. And this chapter delves into that a little bit. For some of us, it comes easier than others. Can it be trained? Some of it can be trained. Hiring is difficult because in this snapshot, if you will, you're asking yourself or this person, are they going to be the right fit? And are they going to be able to handle all these different situations? And we'll look at some aspects of recruitment and selection. Never easy to do. I've done it, I can't even tell you how many times. And the thing is, some of you are sitting there going, yeah, well, I'm going to own my own business. Well, you own your own business, you become human resources, and this becomes critical. And, in my opinion, a lot of the great organizations, there is contact in the process of hiring with the person that is in charge at least once. They may be the be-all, end-all. I may trust your recommendations, but ultimately I make the hiring decision. So how we go about that's discussed in this chapter. So studying the job. It looks like I need to slide this down just a little bit. You don't know what you're looking for until you know what the job is. You will hear the term KSAs, my gosh, probably from now until you stop working. But they're important as a starting point, as you can see that going beyond. But analyzing the job, we can't be expected to hire the right people and staff our establishment if we don't know what we need. So we have to sit there, and it is, quite frankly, a pain, but look through what does the job entail. In your mind, what is the perfect person for this job going to be? Not obviously what they look like, but what do I need them to be? So we look at talent profiles. They talk a little bit about competency-based approaches, good and bad of that. And again, it is that competencies change. That's pretty much your I guess, if you will, your bad part about that. But in general, we're talking about what it takes. What competency should they have to perform this job, whether that job is front desk, server, dishwasher, housekeeping, whatever it's going to be. And look at the people you already have and say, I wish they could all be like this person. And that gives us kind of a benchmark as to what to look for. Key characteristics: enthusiasm. This comes out for us, in the interview. And we talk about the surface acting and the deep acting. You've done this long enough, or you do it long enough, you realize that it's pretty easy to fake a lot of things for the guest. Not necessarily that difficult. Going beyond that, the deep acting is the real emotional connection that they feel. I've worked for companies that we've said, answer the phone with a smile because the guest can tell, which is true. which is also cheesy, but it happens. So, things that we look at. I know of a story of a very high-ranking president whose assistant worked for him. And in the hiring process, no one knew that his assistant was the one that made or broke the interview. And it was how that person presented themselves while they waited for the president. He made them wait on purpose. And he saw how they interacted with his assistant. You may agree with it. You may disagree with it. They certainly had no idea what was going on. But it was how he determined if he would hire them or not. So we look at all those things. Now, where do we find them? So if we look internally, why we would look internally is the known quantity of knowing what we're getting. And the internal equity is people like to be promoted. People like to see your organization promote internally. I mean, no one wants to be hired and say, well, you're never going to move up because such and such has been here 30 years, so you're always going to be at this position. I don't think too many people, unless they're starting off and are planning on going somewhere else, want to hear that. So they already have experience with our product. They know our culture. They know our methods, so it's much easier than teaching. It's much cheaper, and they're already familiar with what we're looking for. The way that you can do that internally, there's a bunch of different ways. You can post them internally. You give your employees the heads up. Look, we may have to post this job outside the organization, but we wanted to give everybody here first crack at this position because we're going to offer it to everybody. And so you decide how you want to do that. But again, knowing what you've got. So then you say, well, why would you ever go outside? Well, sometimes you can't find the candidate internally, or there are no qualified candidates internally. And when you're internal, it can be the case of kind of same old, same old. So if we look for somebody who, let's say, worked for a different hotel, and they bring in new ideas and fresh perspectives. Now, again, the willingness for you and as an organization to actually look at those ideas and perspectives and welcome them and embrace them. And then there may be certain things that you don't have that you need. And the increased diversity, I always want you to think about diversity, which is obviously great, but never needs to be done from the standpoint of, well, I don't think we're diverse enough, so let's hire person X, Y, and Z because they check off all the boxes of what we're looking for. That is not diversity. Okay, that is the worst possible way you can do it. Again, all these different ideas that come externally that are great, that aren't the status quo. The balance of the internal-external problem that you have is that you want to make sure that you're not, someone's been there for 10 years and here comes someone in from Florida Atlantic University or walking in off the street taking the job they think they should have. This slide looks at all kinds of different types of methods to search. Is one better than the other? I don't necessarily think so. You have to see what works. Employee referrals, we would always say, are great because you would think that the employee would only recommend people that they want to work there because they probably enjoy working there. But at the same time, a lot of employees are nervous because well, what if something happens and my friend, my neighbor, my roommate's girlfriend gets fired? And then how does that look for me? So, it really depends. You'll see student recruiting. If any of you are taking classes, not just online, but on our campus, you'll probably see that many times, not just in our field on campus, but all over the place. You're going to see companies that are here recruiting students. Students are a great pool to recruit from. Young, energetic people. I'm not saying that's all students, but that's a lot in companies like that. You see employers of choice. You know about this stuff. Have callback files. Check and see what your competition's doing. I mean, not saying go in there and aggressively poach, but you see a really good server. Hey, can I ask you if you know anybody else like you who is looking for a new opportunity? There's nothing wrong with that. Now, you've gone through this process. How do you find the best person? the application helps a lot, because if we structure this application the right way, we can list in there exactly what we want. And you see pencil and paper, excuse me, versus online. I would say online you can just gather so much more data and information and help yourself with screening by having this electronic database that helps you screen out applicants, legally, of course. And then you get to the interview. I've seen plenty of unstructured interviews, and I guess there's benefit to that, but for consistency for us and our team and you and your managers, we want to have everything as controlled as possible so that there is a checklist. Now listen, I'm going to tell you from a human resources standpoint, that's just smart because it's a legal thing to do. But then that way, everyone's getting asked the same questions. And we have a benchmark to look at their responses and what we think we're looking for. It doesn't mean you can't use behavioral interviews, doesn't mean you can't use situational interviews. Just, in my opinion, as much as you can, list that stuff down. If you are going to go off the cuff and go unstructured, that to me is where you need to definitely document everything in that interview so that someone else picks up and knows what you've talked about with this candidate and what we should maybe ask some other candidates. It becomes very critical. Psychological testing, personality traits that we're looking for. I can tell you there's the Myers-Briggs test. There's plenty of different tests that, I've worked for companies that we don't want. Think about yourself. Do you want 4 people just like you running your hotel? Most companies will tell you, no, we want 4 kinds of different personalities. When I see you in my classes one-on-one, especially in human resources, I have a lot of exercises I do to kind of illustrate that point, hit it home a little bit more to kind of see where you rank in all these areas that you see on here, and also to kind of see where I think you would fit best in the organization, which could be anywhere. Integrity test, cognitive. Integrity is interesting. You don't see them as much anymore, but I've had tests where basically it's 100 questions, and one of the questions tells you that stealing is wrong, and then 20 questions later puts you in a situation where you may have access to someone who found $100, and it's your friend, and they're going to split it with you. What do you do? And so you kind of see that is asking you the same question, worded differently later on in the test. Agree or disagree, it's out there. We don't see it as much as we used to. For references, drug testing back in the day used to be incredibly expensive, and it's not anymore. And so many companies do it. I'm shocked to say that I still see a lot of companies that don't check references. They should. We understand that a lot of times you're putting people on there who probably going to say think bad about you, but to call. In an HR class, we would tell you what you can and cannot say in checking your references, and you'd be amazed at the information people tell you they shouldn't tell you, which is great for you if you're hiring. But again, protecting your organization and your guest is worth the extra step of the background check and the drug test. There's something crazy in the book about, a registered sex offender getting hired at a daycare. It's a terrible example in the book as far as I'm concerned, but it does hit home the point that everyone has to be checked before they're hired. And you may love that person. They don't pass the check, you don't hire them. Making the decision. Look, we have high turnover. Everything's not going to work out. You get every information you can. You balance everything out. Keep good relationships with applicants, because some people are going to turn you down. Some people aren't going to work out. And then you go back to plan B, the second person. So keep those doors open as much as you can. They may still not be available by the time you've passed them over, but you never know. And weigh it in. Talk to your staff. Why A over B? Why this person over that person? Why should we do this instead of that? Quickly, onboarding. Where we mess up so much is not getting these people acclimated to our culture correctly. So make sure that you have got a plan in place to make them feel welcome, make them feel useful, make them feel like they're part of this. Don't stick them in a room with a video that's 25 years old. Okay? We want a diversified workforce. We want people to feel comfortable. We want to reduce turnover. And it's very difficult to do. What do they mean by not always bad? Quickly, I'll tell you that some people don't need to work for our organization. They just don't. And then the last formula is there. Turnover costs money, and we need to avoid it.